This one is very special. I think it's the first time in my time that we've brought someone from a school administration to talk with us and give us insight about how comprehensive schools work and how music might fit into those sort of schools. So I'm pretty thrilled to hear how this goes tonight. Remember, it'll sort of be informal, off the cuff. I think we can have question and answer. And don't feel hurt if we get close to the end and I say, well, it's probably time for maybe we'll need one or two more questions. First, though, let's help Principal Lewis, before I introduce her, kind of see who you are. How many people are going up for student teaching next semester? How many people are first-year students? Second? Third? Fourth? Fifth? Okay, we don't go past that. So that's sort of the idea. They're all music education majors, and we've spent a lot of time getting you to practice and stay in this building, as you well know, and that sort of funnels in. Part of my job is to funnel back out and get you into your student teaching placement and to let you in, sort of drift into your blind spot while you start to see yourselves becoming more and more as teachers rather than just practicing people who do what we say. So, very happy, very excited. Let's give Principal Lewis a warm welcome.
So, I don't really know where to start. I'll start a little bit, I guess, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. So first I'll tell you a little bit about my background, because that makes a little bit of a difference in terms of how you hear anything I have to say. I'm just sort of a blank slate to all of you. I've not met any of you until tonight. And so if you don't know my context, then you know what my thoughts or feelings are, don't necessarily have, it's harder to get a sense of those. So I actually was born and raised in Juneau. My family is all still there. I have one sister that lives in Sitka and has raised her family, kids, grandkids, etc. there, but otherwise, literally everyone is in Juneau. I left Juneau to go to Spokane, to go to Whitworth University, and when I graduated from high school, and ended up staying in Spokane. I majored in math, minored in PE, became a math teacher, and got my first job right there in Spokane. So I stayed there for 26 years. Doing that, raising my own children, one of whom is a junior at Whitworth right now, my youngest, followed in my footsteps 30 years after I left Juneau to go to Whitworth. He went to Whitworth as a freshman, and I came back to the state of Alaska. So there was some full circle pieces to that. While I was in Spokane, I taught high school math for 16 years before I went into administration. I earned my master's at Eastern Washington in mathematics, and then later my doctorate from Washington State University, which was my son's worst nightmare because he's a total Husky fan, University of Washington, but I became a Coug and got my doctorate in educational leadership there. And in my administrative career, I've been a high school assistant principal, then I was an elementary principal for 3 years, and then I worked at central office for 3 years. The last 2 years in a very large Spokane school district, 29,000 kids, and I was in charge of all curriculum, K-12. Insane job. Learned a lot though. Before coming back to Fairbanks and coming back to the state to Fairbanks to be principal at North Pole High School. So it's my 3rd year at North Pole High School. So I've seen the system from a lot of different levels, from literally elementary. My first 2 years of teaching actually were in junior high, 7 to 9, and then high school, and then central office perspective, and then raising my own children through. One of whom is sort of toying with the idea of being a math teacher, but I think he doesn't want to admit it yet. In all of those experiences, I've sort of woven my time in and out of the arts, and never personally been directly involved, but I've watched the programs and have witnessed some very successful music programs in high schools. In the Meade School District where I was in Spokane, they're very well known, very top district in the state, and their music programs are such. The first year we opened Mount Spokane High School, both high schools came together and marched in the Rose Parade. Their marching bands were accepted and did the Rose Parade that year. And now as a principal, One of the things that I value incredibly is the cross-section of kids who can be involved in the arts and find their place. And when I watch students perform or I walk into the classroom, it always amazes me. It's one of the few pockets, because by the time you get to high school, it's different in elementary. In elementary, everything is integrated. A lot more integration in elementary, but by the time you get to high school, especially sophomore, junior, senior, that integration gets less, and we sort of start getting kids filing into lines, figurative lines. And so one of my biggest joys is when I see those lines blurred and kids participating together, and the arts is one place where that happens, whether it's an art class, a music class, a choir class, and every kid can sort of find value there and participate side by side with someone who they're not maybe going to sit in the same math class or the same history class, but they can be side by side playing an instrument or singing a song, and I think that really adds value to the culture of a school. The other thing that I think happens is the adults involved can make a big impact, because when they engage the rest of the school in their department and really sort of solicit and seek out participation from other staff members, whether it's sharing performances. We have had our band play in the Commons before school. Has always been in the past part of their final exam. And so when we had a late start morning, they would play there. The choir, Bruce Hansen always brings his kids around singing when they're getting ready for a performance. So they'll just come right through the office and stand in front of the office and sing, or they'll walk into a classroom that he knows the teacher and they'll perform, and taking that initiative really ties it together for some folks. The other thing probably that I should touch on is, because you're all hearing it, all this budget crisis, right, that's happening everywhere in the country and has finally hit Alaska again. I just read an article today that was something about slashing the arts, and I've been through several different budget crises much earlier in my career, and then there was sort of this hiatus, and then it hit Washington several years before it hit here. So my last 3 to 5 years in Washington were, every year. Spokane School District cut, over $45 million in 3 years out of their budget. However, during all of those situations, I did not see the arts being cut. And I think there is support for the arts. Now, obviously, some individual districts are going to possibly view that different, but in my own experience, I've seen tightening like anywhere. Class sizes are going up, but there is a value placed on arts, and I don't see that really at risk. I see it at risk as much as anything else, that it could be minimized, but it's not going away. I think the value is inherently built in to most school districts. Well, I want to open up to questions, and then I'll think of some other things maybe that are important, and they can be, you can fire away. I've done this a long time, so you're not going to ask me anything. Well, you might ask me something I don't know, and that's easy. I'll just tell you I don't know. Go ahead.
When you're approached with budget cuts and you have to defend the arts, how do you go about doing that? What examples do you use? How do you?
As a building principal, what happens in our district is I get a staffing amount. So I get 30.5 FTE, or whatever it happens to be. And I pretty much have to make those decisions around what the scheduling needs of our students are, what programs we're going to offer, what we are making cuts. It's very, very, very difficult. And some of that, we're now in sort of every year I've been here, we've had to slice some staffing off. So now we're getting into electives and, everywhere, core classes, subject areas, as well as electives. For me, the arts themselves are easy, they defend themselves. I've never felt like I had to defend them. The research is really clear about music and mathematics, the connection there. The work that we know about brain science with the right brain and what kinds of things students need to fulfill in order to succeed in other areas. You know, there's tons of research out there, but most of it is more experiential. What I've seen is, you know, I can find you research, but more than anything, it's about the experience that kids have in these programs and what those results are. I mean, they're better students, their attendance is higher, you know, they add to the culture of the school. They have performance expectations that sort of rise, all kinds of things, behavior, dress, professionalism, you know, expectations, all that rubs off in a school. So I've always felt like it sort of defended itself.
So, but if you have somebody come up to you and go, okay, that's great, but how do you know you can't test that?
Right.
What do you say to that?
I don't know. Well, then I would pull out the research, because there is research out there. You know, then I would rely on what other people have done, because I didn't do my doctorate in music education. Because you would not want to hear me play the violin as I did in 4th grade. However, but a lot of people have done that research, and it really is pretty clear and pretty clear research about the benefits of students being involved in the arts. Yeah, and it's easier to defend at the high school level. At the elementary level, I should also say that then it's just like recess. It's at elementary, those are easy targets, but you have to have someone there who's going to stand up for the core values of what education means. And education is not solely reading, writing, you know, arithmetic. As much as that is incredibly important, it also fits. These other pieces also fit, and so you have to have the right advocates in place in those more vulnerable places. I would also say that one of the things that helps, especially in those more vulnerable settings, is how you as the music professionals approach your job. So, and I've seen some incredible elementary music professionals. How you approach that makes a world of difference. If I'm the principal and you want me to advocate for your program, then you're the best commercial for that. So if you are, you know, welcoming kids in, the more the merrier. If you're not having a lot of restrictions around your program, if you're taking all kinds of kids regardless, if you're out fighting for instruments for kids that can't afford them, you know, all those kinds of things. If you're saying, where else can I help? I have 20 minutes, where else can I help? Those kinds of things, then you're also being part of that solution. That's really, really important. We're all human. So if I don't think that somebody or a program is being very effective, or is being selective about which students they're choosing to serve, or really putting everything they have into it, then I might start looking that way for next when it comes to having to eliminate something. But if I think I can't really live without you, or my kids can't live without you, you know, then you're doing your job. Yeah, good question.
It kind of goes in directly. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Directly into what I was going to ask you is kind of what do you look for in a music teacher when you decide, well, okay, if they're worth keeping on, or we need to find somebody else? You just talked about a little bit about what makes them a good music teacher, but how do you evaluate a teacher once they've been hired?
Good question. Student engagement is a huge piece of that. And as you go in as young educators, one of the things that you have to figure out how to balance is how you engage kids and maintain your professionalism. Because I want you to engage kids, but I also want you to be the teacher. And I don't want there to be blurry lines around that. So, and learning that is a total art in and of itself. I mean, when I started teaching, I was 20, well, I turned 22 my first day of teaching. I looked like I was 12. You know, it was a junior high, and I literally got confused for a student all the time. I carried my keys because in a junior high, nobody drives. So keys are a huge sign of authority in a junior high. So I learned after the first month, jeez, this is getting really uncomfortable when the librarian asked me where I'm supposed to be. I said, well, I'm not sure. I'm like, did I miss a meeting? She thought I was one of the kids. So I learned to carry my keys. But I also had to learn, how do I do this? How do I teach kids engage them in mathematics in junior high and make sure that they understand that I am the teacher and that there's strong boundaries, and that I'm the professional. I did that by dress, how I dressed. Never, ever, ever wore jeans, because if I did, it would just made all those problems worse. How I spoke to kids, how I carried myself, what expectations I had in my classroom, treated them with respect, and all those things grew. I mean, it took obviously a couple years to really feel very confident in that, but there is a balance there in terms of how you get kids where you want them to be, and yet how you carry yourself in a way that there's no question on their part that you're not their friend and you're not their buddy or you're their tutor, you're their teacher, and there's a difference. So I really want someone who can balance those things, or be working towards that, because it does take some time. I want someone who is fair, so who has high expectations, but is also fair to kids and doesn't distinguish one over the other for some unknown reason, or some known reason. That's not okay. So high expectations, but also compassionate, cares about kids. And I know those are sort of ambiguous things, but they're things to think about in pretty short order, in part because I've had so much experience, but in pretty short order, after working with someone, I pretty much know their core values based on how they treat themselves, how they treat their colleagues, how they treat kids, what their actions say, as much more quickly than their words, their tone, their context that they operate in personally and professionally. So there are some of those sort of what I would call sort of soft skills. And then, of course, I want you to know your content. I want you to be able to help your kids get better. I want them to be able to take on more challenging songs and get better as performers, and those things. And then the other really critical piece is I want a team player. Because you can be the best that you're going to be in your corner of the world, but that's not good enough for North Pole High School. I need you to be willing to be the best in your corner, but also to help everybody else be their best. Because at the end of the day, you can't do it all, and I can't do it all. But together, with everybody step forward, we can get pretty close, at least, at the end of the day. So I really want someone who's thoughtful and considerate about how they're going to contribute, as well as how they're going to create their empire. We're all competitive, we all want the best of the best, but there's a difference there that's pretty revealing when I can tell somebody is out for the good of the whole. Yeah. Chelsea, did you have a question?
I did actually. I'm kind of going with that question now, but as far as hiring goes, what do you look for in interviews? In the interview situation, because sometimes it's not always easy to tell right away whether that person fits those qualities or not. So what is it that you're looking for during just the interview process?
During the interview process, what I'd say, I've interviewed a ton of people, and I think one helpful hint for you as you go into an interview, so I'm going to flip it around first. So what do you think about when you go into an interview versus what I'm looking for? So when you go into an interview, I think it's really important that you think about the opportunity to share who you are. That's your job in an interview. And that takes a little bit of the pressure off. It is not about getting a job. Your responsibility when you go into an interview is to be calm and collected enough to be able to express who you are as an educator. What your values are, what your priorities are, how you would work with kids, what your experiences are. And then my job, and typically my team's job, is to determine if you're a fit for, in this particular case, North Pole High School. There might be a million reasons why that's not a fit. Some of which could be in your control, some of which could not be. Or you might be. But if you think about each question when it's asked, what of that from that question connects with who you are, and then use that question to express that versus feeling like you're going to get 15 questions and you're really hoping you have the right answers for all 15 when you don't know what those, you see the difference? Because there's a fear. It's not easy to go into an interview when you don't necessarily know what those questions are. And so then, because you're students, your frame is getting the right answer, right? Because that's what you do all day, every day now. So it's easy to go into an interview, and that's a lot of pressure. So if you go in with the mindset that you are going to listen to the question and sort out quickly in your mind how that question relates to who you are as an educator and what you're going to bring to this setting, and respond that way, and at the end of the interview, if you have had enough, taken advantage of those opportunities enough to really feel like you kind of left yourself in the room the best you could, then you've had a successful interview. And then whether you get the job or not is a little bit out of your hand, and it's about, so a lot of times about fit. The kinds of things I'm looking for when I interview someone is, you know, certainly some content in their answers, right? Depending on the content area I'm interviewing for. I want to know that the person knows, has the skills in that content area. But I also want to know that, again, they're going to be a team player, that they're sincere, that I'm not getting a list of responses. I'm not getting the list of terms that I just had an interview like that. It was great. If I had a look for checklist, I would have checked 30 things. But that's what it ended up feeling like, was a laundry list in every answer versus really getting to know that person and how they would respond sincerely to different situations in the building, to different kids, etc. So there's a fine line there between sharing what you know and who you are, and doing that in a sincere way when you're under a lot of pressure, you know. And most people I hope at least, that do interviews understand that there's a pressure factor and try to make you feel comfortable. But collegiality, you know, we don't shut our doors anymore and do our work. And so I've got to know that you're going to be able to work with your colleagues, and I've got to know that you care about kids. If you go through a whole interview and you don't describe an experience that you've had working with kids that meant something to you, I'm probably going to wonder at the end of that. And you don't want to leave me wondering that, right? Because the most important thing we do is work with kids. So you certainly have to reveal to me that that's one of your priorities, is how you work with kids. You are all going to work with kids differently. There isn't a right way to do that. But I just need to know that you're sincere about your work with kids, that you see the bigger picture of working with kids, and that's one of your core values. Does that make sense? Because it's sometimes, and here's the other warning I would say about interviews, is sometimes our best strength we don't get out there because we assume it. So you have to, that's that piece about making sure you get out during an interview who you are and what you care about. Because I've interviewed people and been on the interview team, and in the debrief somebody will say, well, I'm not sure if I interviewed for a principal position once, and they weren't sure if this gentleman cared about kids. Well, I knew this principal from the side of our district. He was amazing with kids. I mean, that was his absolute strong suit. In the interview, he never thought to say that because that's just who he is. It's like, of course, duh. But it almost cost him the job. If there weren't several people in that room that knew him, he would not have gotten that job probably. And he ended up being a fantastic principal at that high school. So that, I've seen that happen on a number of occasions. When you have a strong suit, you forget sometimes to say it because it's just sort of so obvious to you. But that's part of your job in an interview, is to make sure that you use your responses to share who you are. Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. This is perfect for us. You mentioned earlier that your responsibility as a building principal is partially to decide how FTE hours go and scheduling based on the students' needs. I think it took me about 2.5 years in my high school position to realize the role of the counselors and how they work with the principal. Do you mind speaking to that?
Sure. In regards to scheduling and staffing and all of that. Well, they play sort of, in some ways, an official role, and in other plays an unofficial role. So I work very closely with them. A lot of high schools it would be an assistant principal that deals with master schedule pieces, but in our school I end up doing it just because I have so much experience with it. And so I work closely with counselors, with registration numbers, the whole registration process, deciding what courses are gonna be on the course selection sheet, getting the numbers in the computer, which is what we're right in the middle of right now, deciding how many sections of everything, and then building the master schedule. So I work closely with them. In fact, I have a meeting set up at 8 o'clock tomorrow, or Monday morning, to meet with counselors for an hour, doing nothing but just talking about registration numbers and implications there might be. The unofficial role I can tell you that counselors play is how kids choose their courses. There are many conversations that go on between a kid and a counselor that influence kids and their choices. So they are another group, counselors are, that are important to you as a music educator for you to build a relationship with. Because if they trust you, right, their bottom line is they care about kids. Their number one priority is kids. I have this umbrella responsibility. I have to care about kids and all the adults in the building. I mean, I'm the gatekeeper, and I don't sleep well all the time at night, but my job is to make sure that North Pole High School is an incredible place for all the adults and all the kids. Counselors have the luxury. Now, I want them to be a team player also, obviously, but they have the luxury of really focusing on kids. And at the end of the day, whatever they decide in their head, whether it's valid or not, whatever they decide in their head is best for kids is what they're going to speak, how they're going to influence kids. So it's important for you to bridge that with counselors, no matter what level, and make sure that you're connecting with them and that they understand your program, that they understand you're going to live that. They're going to get that by when the kid is in a corner and you have a trip planned and the kid has another obligation, and how you compromise on that and make that happen. Or a kid's in a grading dilemma and they have an F in another class, and so that's jeopardizing something, how you work with that other teacher to support that kid. Those are examples of experiences that are going to build that. You definitely, the walk is more important than the talk. The other person that I would say that's really important to you in the building is the custodian and the secretary. So you are an activity-based program, right? You're going to have kids everywhere, you're going to have stuff everywhere, you're going to be in before school, you're going to be in after school, you're going to be on the weekends, and your relationship with the secretary, the one who does all the purchasing and requisitions, etc., and that lead or head custodian, or the one that cleans your room. When I was a first-year teacher, I walked into my room one day, and there were these, right near my desk were these flying ants. It was just disgusting. They were everywhere. And I called the office because I just didn't really know what to do. And so she sent Jerry, the custodian, in, and he comes in with his can and took care of it, sprayed it, and then he looked right at me. He said, I just want you to know that last year when this happened, I couldn't find a can of this anywhere in this building. And I was like, Jerry, that's awful. He goes, just want you to know that. And I said, well, okay. I built a relationship with him, and I didn't even know it. But, it's like a lesson learned. That one went in my bank right then. And there really is, and one of my core values is valuing people and doing that regardless of any position or stature or whether it's a parent or a staff member or a kid. That's one of my really strong core values. But it was a very clear, vivid example to me early in my career when I realized, okay, so relationships are very important, and do not forget the custodian. So, I don't know if that helped, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the things I was wondering about also is just how scheduling works as far as classes like that students are required to take. Like I know a lot of times there's conflicts between AP classes and
Right.
the elective classes and
Yes.
things like that.
Mhm.
And how does that?
We work really hard to try to schedule what we call singletons away from each other. So AP Chemistry is a singleton because we have one section of that. Orchestra would be a singleton because we have one orchestra class. So we try to make sure those things don't line up opposite of each other. It's really challenging, and our school's about 700, and it's really hard to meet all those needs. And we've had a couple times since I've been there where that didn't happen. We had 3 or 4 kids with conflicts. And in those cases, what we did was we worked with the teachers, and then we found a way to sort of compromise, sometimes more successfully than others. Than other times, but we try to avoid that as much as possible. teachers, I always have to ask, will you check with orchestra and see how many of them are taking AP biology or AP calc or whatever it is, so that we can avoid those things. But there's only 6 periods in a day, so you try to minimize it, but sometimes it happens. But you don't ever do it in a way that's really direct head-to-head that decimates both programs. You try to minimize that the best you can. Yeah.
I can really tell that you love administration. And how did you go from being a teacher and then realizing, oh, I want to be an administrator?
That was a hard decision for me. I really liked the classroom. I loved teaching, and I coached. I coached volleyball, I coached fast pitch softball, I was a cheer advisor. I was always doing way more things than any one human being should do. Nothing has changed really there. But what happened for me was I reached a point where I've always sort of been one that, I don't know, I just always sort of have looked like if there's a challenge left unturned, I'm not very content with that. So if there's something I can do, then I want to do it. And so that's just sort of part of my makeup. So when I started getting to a point in my teaching where what happened was, how I can best describe it is, like if I ended up with 3 sections of pre-calc. Like I enjoyed that the first time, really liked it the second. By the third time, I sort of started feeling like, I'm glad to see you guys, but you should have been here at 8 because I did a good job this morning. I don't really want to do it again. Part of being that high school teacher and having the same class 3 times, it just was boring to me the third time. I already knew what questions they were going to ask. I knew where they were going to get stuck. I knew where I had to slow down, where I could speed up. That challenge kind of got lost for me. I still loved the process of teaching. I still look for any open math book possible, and I stop and make sure they don't need some help. But for me, so when I first made the decision, I decided, well, I'll get my certification, because then I have, if the opportunity ever arose, I'm prepared. But I didn't know if I'd ever do it. And I already had my master's, so it wasn't like, well, I'll combine this. I had already had my master's way back when I first started teaching. So I did it, and then ironically, that first fall, I really wanted to only teach and coach for sure for a year, and then after I was done with my program, and then sort of explore the options. Because in the middle of my internship, I was in a car accident, I broke my neck. It was just, it was a lot. So I thought, just 1 year, could I just be a normal person and teach and coach? And then a job opened up in the school that I was in for an assistant principal. And so it was timing is everything with administration. So I decided to apply for that. And here I am, 13 years later, still doing administration. What I can say about administration is that it can be as little or as much kid-focused as you want it to be. So for me, what I have loved about being back at the high school level, because for 3 years I was at that central office level, 1 year as a superintendent, 2 years as executive director of instructional programs, that 29,000 kid district, I was like, I needed binoculars. I was so far from the classroom. It was awful. So for those 2 years, it was really not, I knew towards the end of that 2 years that my compass was off. I found every excuse to be in the room with teachers that I could, but I had to work hard to do it, and I was too far from the classroom. So when I came back here, came here and had the opportunity to apply at North Pole, it was just really a nice fit for me. I love kids. That's a really critical part of my work. But a lot of administrators have a different, slant on that, but you can design it kind of the way you want.
In the wake of what happened at Sandy Hook Elementary School, have you seen any changes nationwide and statewide as to what administration and teachers are doing to make schools safer? Because teachers, we are also providing a safe haven for the children.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that's going on borough-wide or statewide to improve safety or security or to make the children feel safer?
Yeah, that is really so heart-wrenching. And the responsibility is almost overwhelming when you think about it too long. So I try to only think about it in short snippets of time, because really, it is we are so vulnerable. No matter what we do, we're vulnerable. We're a human business. There's no way to lock things up. However, we can be as prepared as possible. And I think that what we always do are sort of ritualistic drills and preparedness pieces, I do think it sort of ramped that up and allowed us to have an excuse to sort of rethink all of our processes, and really take the job of preparing seriously. As an example, Monday, we're doing a district-wide lockdown drill. So every building in the whole district is going to lock down at 1:15. And, come on in, Sandy, hi.
I'm sorry I'm late. I'm finding it.
Oh, no. And so that's an example that has the first time that's been done in the 3 years that I've been here. So we're doing that. We're testing radios. We did one test a while ago, I don't know, a month ago maybe. And so we can test to make sure that we have radio contact all of the schools with downtown, that all the frequencies work, et cetera. My last lockdown drill in the building was maybe 2 weeks before spring break. So as an example, when I went from room to room, checking in rooms, their instruction is to be in lockdown. And lockdown means you are lights off, nobody's talking, you're down, wherever you can hide in the room, you're hiding. And so I went to several classrooms. When I go in, they're not I'm the perpetrator at that point. So I'm banging on the door, got my keys. Several classrooms that I went in, they were not in lockdown. They were sort of in semi-lockdown. They were sitting on desks, some of them the lights not off, talking. I really put on my game face, and in each of those rooms I just said, we are so far off of protocol right now, I am coming back in 2 minutes and you better be in lockdown. And the kids are just like, because they don't see me like that, right? That's not I don't have to play the bad guy very often. I do in big cases, but not very often, so they're not used to seeing Principal Lewis like that. And I had some scared kids, but I had to set that tone, because this is for the teacher as well as for the kids. And so then I had follow up with those. I came back to their room, said that's better, and there were probably 4 different rooms, and I had one follow up email that when I came back I said that's better, it's probably an 8 out of a 10, and I left, and I got an email from that teacher. Her kids were really upset that I still thought they were only an 8, and they wanted feedback for why they weren't. So I gave them that. But those are little things that are within my control. When I do a lockdown drill, dang it, we better be in lockdown. Because when I do that real call one day, their lives are on my hands and those teachers' hands. And so really trying to ramp up the seriousness of drills is one simple way that, we can get better. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good question. Nancy, do you want to tell them first who you are?
I'm Sandy Kowalski. I'm the principal at Randy Smith. And did this start at 6? I have it at 6 on my calendar, and then I didn't know where the room was.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have looked around for you, I apologize.
That's okay, but I was getting here for a 6 o'clock
But
time. I
we're-
can tell I was starting late. I am so sorry, you guys.
We're thrilled you're here, and ladies and gentlemen, you should know both of these principals have taken our student teachers before into their schools, and they've been very helpful with our process. So, yeah, we're just doing some question and answer now, and I guess it's just been sort of open to the floor, but if you would talk a bit about what you do and your role, we'd love that.
Okay. Well, not sure what's been shared before, but ask me any questions if I'm not filling in kind of the details that you guys expected. But Randy Smith is a 7th and 8th grade school, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with Bob Lockwood. He's our music teacher there. He teaches the orchestra, band, and choir. He does all of those. In addition to that, he teaches world music elective, and he teaches guitar elective. So he does the whole range. And he does jazz band in the morning at 0 hours. So he has, we were looking for a music instructor when we hired him that could teach band, orchestra, and music, which at that time was pretty unique for Fairbanks, but that's the position that was open when I first came on as principal. That's the position that I was hiring for. We were lucky enough to find someone like Bob who was willing to stretch in all those areas. I think one of the questions that was given to me when I first got the letter a couple months ago was, what was it that I'm looking for and expecting out of music teachers? I'm not a music person myself. All of my own children play music, but I was not raised on music like they were. And so I honestly had to do my research in order to even begin to recruit for a music teacher for the position in our school. And I did a lot of research on the internet to just find out what other schools look for in music teachers. So I honestly did a Google search, interview questions for music teachers to find out, to educate myself. So most of us principals are not music trained. So that's a good start for you, because we're doing our research too. What is it other schools look for when they're looking for music teachers? If you're looking for some specific positions, I would get on and start to search what other people look for and prepare yourself for those interviews and prepare yourself in those skill sets. We interviewed a lot of people for our music position, and even without my experience, I knew I was looking for someone who in the interview I felt had a good broad background in music and who would connect well with students. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Bob, but that guy connects. He sets the tone for our school, as a matter of fact. We really hit it out of the park with him. But music in the middle school is one of those times in the student's life that their parents are probably pushing them to take it in middle school. And those students are terrified to go from 6th grade to 7th grade. And music is just one of those things they don't know if other people will think is cool. A lot of our kids are pushed into music. They've been taking music lessons in elementary at our school, and their parents still want them to take music. And so there's that little bit of friction as they're coming in. So we needed someone who could help address that with our students and make them happy that they're still playing music and learning. So that's what I look for in a nutshell.
Sandy reminded me of something about interviews. I think one of the most commonly missed strategy for teacher interviews is to know the school you're interviewing for. So do the research, get online, call somebody there, even if you don't know them. I mean, find somebody, if you know anybody there, talk to them. Don't come into the interview and ask, what bell schedule are you on? Holy cow, that tells me right away you have not even looked at our website, right? When at the end of it, so let me finish that thought. So get a feel for the school, one way or the other. If all you have is online, then boy, dig through that site. Every which way direction, look at pictures of staff, do whatever you can online to get a feel for that school. Even if it doesn't seem like it matters, if there's a parent newsletter on there, read the newsletter. You'll learn maybe about some of the initiatives they're working on. The other thing is, at the end of the interview, there's also a place typically where you can ask questions. Be thoughtful about what you ask. Don't ask 10 questions. The interview team does not want to feel like they're now being interviewed by you, right? And that happens more often than you would think. And it's out of a good effort. I think people want to look interested, right? Well, that's not the time. Look interested by having some content to your answers that are specific to that school, and so that you know what kinds of things they're working on. Or do they have professional learning communities? Do they have advisory? Do they have longer block periods? Those kinds of things. But don't have a litany of 10 questions that you're going to fire off at the end of the interview. Feel free to have one or two, and also make sure they're not pointed. Like, well, what are you looking for in this position? Well, now I'm going to describe something that maybe you didn't have in that interview. That puts me in a really awkward position. So be careful about what you ask, and don't ask a whole bunch.
I think it's a good point. Ask questions that if you were a new employee in that school and you wanted to just be ready for your first day, that you would ask. Like how does your advisory program work, and how would the music department support that? That might be a question for the interview, but yeah, I do recall some interviews where I felt like the candidate was really trying to impress me with 10 questions at the end, and the content of the interview before that is what we were looking for. And the interview, when the interviewee is asking questions in the interview, it's really helpful to gauge, is that something you really want to spend that time on? There's usually another interview right after you.
Can I just ask a little bit about your background and how you became a principal?
I first started off teaching Inupiaq language and English in a small village in Deering, Alaska, rural village. I'm certified in UBAC language and certified high school English. So I taught K-12 in UBAC and 7-12 English. And the high school program where I was at was a 2-room program. We taught 7-12 in 2 classrooms. And I did all of the language arts, social studies. And then there was a guy over here that did all the math, science. And then I would go downstairs to the run of 3 classrooms and teach K-6 in UBAC language, and then run back upstairs and do high school in UBAC. But that's how I started off. But I'm really from a town called Buckland, which is by Deering, and from Kotzebue. That's where I graduated from high school. And Buckland takes a lot of interns from UAF, and they have a history of that. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Buckland. But moved from Deering over to Kotzebue to be closer to my family, and stayed in Kotzebue for 18 years. Teaching, working in some administrative positions there. But I'll be honest, I love teaching. I absolutely love teaching. I never saw myself becoming an administrator. I think what happened was I just kept doing the next thing, and then I found myself at an immersion school for UBAC language, helping a grassroots private school start up there for a year, and my kids were in it, so I was committed to it, and so I took a year off from public education to do that, and got kind of my administrative feet on the ground just by helping out with that. And then I moved back to the school district in a central office position. And after about 5 years, I thought, oh my, I didn't see myself leaving the school. I've been gone. I've been out of the school for a long time. So I started applying for positions back in schools. So I kind of came through a principalship in a way that's not how most people go to a principalship. They go from a classroom and take a master's program, while they're teaching, and then they become a principal. I did my master's program, and then I had some central office experience instead of going straight into a principal position. Then I went back to a principal position, because I can tell you I always tell people that my worst day as an elementary principal, when I started off, is still better than some of my best days as a central office administrator. It's just really fun to be in a school. There's a lot of energy, and I do miss being in close contact with students, but I'm around them much of the day. But yeah, master's degree, and typically teaching into an administrative position is how most people do it. Mine was different.
A question regarding curriculums. When a new teacher comes in and there's a change in teaching styles and curriculum as to what matters value-wise between teachers, a teacher leaving and a teacher filling in a position. As an administrator, when you look at the curriculum that they're trying to implement, are you looking for something that can easily be blended between the students who are, the ones that are going through the changing process? Or is it okay to look at something that's more or less more radical, or more of the other side of the coin, so to speak? And how do you go about the process of moving on from a teacher?
Mm-hmm. That
and
transition.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in many areas, of course, we have a set district curriculum that still doesn't take care of all the transition issues, because there's still sort of an indoctrination that needs to happen in terms of how somebody learns the curriculum, how they interpret it versus somebody else interpreted it. I think transitions, as you would come in as a new instructor, I think it's a good idea to rely on your administrator, and that might be a time when you sort of seek them out as you approach your job, asking some of those questions as to what they've seen in the curriculum, what they think needs to be continued, and feel them out in terms of what because they obviously have seen the program over time, and you haven't seen that. So if you come to that conversation with, these are some things that I believe I bring to this position, you have the context of the history of this program, and you probably know the kids' needs more than I do right now, with me being new. I'm role-playing as though I were you. And so I'd love to have a conversation with you about how we transition this program from Mr. So-and-so to me as the new instructor, and how we might do that so that it's best for kids. Here's some of my ideas. What have you seen in this program that are really successful that we would want to keep? How do you see my ideas fitting into that? and have that conversation with them, I think would be the way I would approach it. Because every administrator might have a different perception of the needs, number one. The needs might be different, and the existing program as it is gonna be different from building to building.
The other thing to consider is your administrator is going to be the one who helps you transition with the families. And our music, the families of our students who play music are pretty involved in their experiences in school. Because there's already been a commitment in elementary school to music in Fairbanks. And it's one of the things that blew me away when we moved here is music exists in the elementary schools here. Parents support it, the community supports it, the district supports it, and by the time they're coming to us in 7th grade, they're trying out for different levels of our music program. So when there is a change, you're also going to need, your principal will want to help support you with the families in as much as the transition is going to impact that year. And your principal will give you guidance on how to talk to parents through some of these difficult conversations. So yeah, clear communication and I would say that if you're walking into a school and you really want to do a radical change, I heard you use the word radical. If you perceive it as a radical change, you should probably temper it at that time, because in our youthfulness, and I'm one of them too, I've been there, we really want to make an impact now. And sometimes we go too quickly and we lose the impact we wanted. So definitely temper your passions, but don't lose the passion. That's important. That's why we are hiring new people all the time. We know that people bring those qualities, their passions and their beliefs into the classroom across the district. But if it's a radical change, you could do too much too soon, too quickly, and lose the impact that you wanted.
The Sandy Hook thing got me thinking about like national crisis, and kind of like what is your expectations for a teacher to almost react or act around a student like the day after, or and I guess this can also relate like if a student like has a death in the family or something like that, or there is a death in the classroom, like something like that. Like what is your expectations for the teacher?
You want to talk
A
to
good
that?
question.
Yeah.
We've been through that this year. We lost a student in our student population this year. What's important to remember is that whatever age you're working with, there are developmental needs that each of that, that those students in that age group will need. At our age group, we knew they needed information, and they needed to trust us that we would give them the information that was appropriate for them. But at the same time, you also have to work with the families and the loved ones of whoever's impacted, whoever is passed away or is really ill. You have to work with them about how much information they want shared. But all students need good information, but how you communicate that information and how much of the details is pretty age specific. As far as supports, once the students knew that we lost one of our students in our school, what our classroom teachers did was they kept their eyes open and their ears open. And if they had any concerns, they referred it to counseling. And if they had any concerns for themselves too, it was emotional for everyone, that they were upfront and got help if they needed it. And they also watched out for other staff members. So pretty much like you do in your own peer group, when you're impacted by a loss, you watch out for one another. That's what you're doing with our young people. You're getting direction from your administration on what you're going to say to students. They're getting their information from counselors and experts in the community. And in schools, you'll be having staff meetings. If something like this happens and everybody needs to be communicating with students, there will be a staff meeting at the beginning of that day or at the beginning of that, or right before the end of the lunch period when the announcement's going to be made. There will be information coming to you so that you know what's age appropriate to say to students at that time, what information is available, and what resources are available. And that's how you support your students.
I would add that in terms of national crises, sometimes, like as an example, the Sandy Hook, right? It's detached from us, but it's connected to us because it's a school. And what the guidance that I usually give teachers is to be careful about how much they're focusing on that, to obviously keep their eyes and ears open and to be sensitive if a kid they think needs extra help, to get them immediately to either an administrator or a counselor, but to not spend all day talking about that and to not have it on the TV all day watching the national news. And some teachers will think that they're being helpful by doing that, and it ends up being the kids need to go about doing their normal business. And so that is one word of caution I usually give staff, is to be
Good
careful.
point. We didn't stop the program when we lost our students, but we gave information and then we were watchful. The other thing that students need is to continue on with their routine
Right.
and loss, because young children, teenagers, don't process loss the way adults do, and it often comes later, and what they need in the moment is routine. And so that's why we had teachers watching out for one another. If they were upset and they couldn't keep to the routine, we had people step in and keep the routine, help to keep the routine for our students, and then they stepped back in. That's a good point. You don't want the students to focus on something they're not ready to process at that moment.
It's almost unavoidable if you work in education for any length of time. You will witness loss. You'll have loss. I lost a student who I was very close to. When I was an elementary principal, my first year as an elementary principal, we lost 3 students that year. 2 they were very medically fragile. One was very quick acting cancer. The other was more terminal issues, long-term issues, and another was not accidental, but it was sudden. And so, and that same year in that district, we had 3 high school students, 1 middle school and 2 high school students. This was a district of 1,800 students. So it was a year of severe loss. By the 3rd time I had to meet with staff, they were broken. So how I dealt with them was as important as how we dealt with the kids. And that's where community becomes important. So that's when you hope you've done a job of building a community in your school so that you can support each other and get through those kinds of times. And that's one of the things I had to tell the staff that 3rd time, because I could hardly look them in the eye, right? I'm delivering this information. I'm like, really? And so I just told them, all I know is that the only way to not feel this is to not care about kids. And we all do what we do because we care about kids. So there's no way to avoid this grief we feel. We have to honor this, and we have to support our kids and support each other. But we can't, the only way to avoid this is to not care about kids. And that's not an option. And so it is important how adults function. And then you have to be sensitive to each other, because we're all different. And we all have different backgrounds, right? So we bring our personal culture to that situation. And then we have to be willing to be flexible and maybe take over for someone so they can go have a 15-minute, cry while you're in their classroom helping out or something like that. That was a negative way to end. We got to have one good question. We can't leave
I'm
that.
trying to put that question at the halfway point.
Yeah, that was a nice
Okay, make
effort
it-
there.
Actually, is there anyone who hasn't asked a question who would like to ask something? And then anybody else? I really, of course, we'll jump to John, but I've noticed an explicit push for community building in both of your schools. I'm lucky I get to go out, excuse me, to all the schools. Am I right? Is there a real push for this?
Yeah.
So you've been taught the profession or their late start days. What exactly is I understand that they're more for time, but how does that reflect, or what's the importance?
Sure. That's a great question. At the high school level, it's a little bit different at the middle school level, but at the high school level, we have professional learning communities every Wednesday morning, and where students start their day 45 minutes late, and staff meet by departments for the most part, and if you are looking for a job in the Fairbanks School District, you better do some research on professional learning communities, because it's one of our major initiatives. So Rick and Rebecca DeFore are sort of the main authors of this program, and it is about basically getting really clear about what you're teaching, knowing how you're gonna know if they get it, what you're gonna do if they don't get it, and what are you gonna do for those that already have it? Basic 4 questions. So the time on Wednesday mornings is spent around identifying, this is, generalizing, but basically identifying essential learnings, creating some common assessments. Every teacher in my building was asked to create 2 common assessments with 1 or more people in their department, or it could be across the district, to decide on what they were gonna test, how they were gonna test it, and then to pull the data together when they were done and look at the data that they got from the assessment and decide what that meant. What changes would they make instructionally next time they taught it? What might adjustments they make now because of what the results were, but to do that with a colleague to share that with. So that's sort of the gist of that professional learning community time.
I'm trying to remember what Bob said was the last skill middle school music teachers were assessing, but at the middle school level, Bob and
Something to do with rhythm.
what's that?
I think it had something to do with
Rhythm, okay. I'm more familiar with the first assessment that they were doing because I was so impressed. Our music teachers were like right on this in this district, the PLC concept, because they already formatively assess in every lesson. If you hear something, you correct it
all
right there.
performance-based.
Yep. And you assess again, and you listen, and you give some pointers, and you keep giving feedback until it's the way you want it. It's like real-time assessment in the classroom all the time. So when we moved towards this PLC model and started having our teachers talk about it, what you have to know is that when you're teaching a content area like maybe math, when you're really trying to teach maybe how to work with quadratic equations, sometimes you get caught up in the lesson as a teacher, and you're really concerned with what you're teaching, and you lose some of that attention to, are the students really learning? And as beginning teachers, your concern every day when you wake up is going to be, what am I doing today? Did I plan enough time? Is it going to, I get all that, but don't forget to always look at the impact that it's having on the students, and what is it you wanted from the students through your lesson, and did they get it? How are you assessing that? And then, the 4 questions is what Bridget went over. What do they need to know? Did they get it? And what are you going to do if they don't get it? And what are you going to do if they do get it? So the middle school teachers, they had been talking that a lot of their students were coming to them, and they could tell that even though they could play music, they couldn't read notes. Okay? They couldn't read their music, but they could play their music. And it reaches a point where you have to be able to read your music if you're going to continue to advance. And it's just like in a reading class. Sometimes you have kids who look like they can read. And our teachers found out that was happening in music as well. So they came up with some quick assessments to determine the fluency level in music reading, sheet music. And they did these quick assessments, and they found 3 or 4 kids in every one of their classes that were just winging it all along. And they said, hey, slow down. This is something you have to do before long. You're not going to be able to keep going on here. Let's do this for you. And my son was one of them. I had no idea. He wasn't reading his music. He was one of those kids that came up to elementary school, and he was doing it by ear. And Mr. Lockwood pulled him in as one of the intervention kids and said, look, I now know you don't know how to read music. And my son came home that night, and he was like, thank God. Someone finally helped me. He had been winging it all along. Then someone stopped him, slowed it down for him, and made him practice until he could move on. And it was liberating for him. He would have thought that he would have been, oh God, I'm so mad, I'm winging it, now I got caught. No, he was relieved. And that's kind of been the reaction we're getting from our students with this, but that's one of the things that our middle school teachers wanted to guarantee, is that when they leave, they are fluent in that skill that we had, before that, assumed they had when they came to us. But my kid was one of them that was winging it.
One of the things we do with our music instructors, because you're generally a singleton teacher, right? There's only one choir teacher, there's one band teacher. We've taken that time, and you often teach a 0 hour at the high school level, so that you're teaching kids during that PLC time. So what we've done is we've converted that time to different chunks of time when district-wide music teachers can get together, and they're loving it. So when we have a half-day early release or something like that, instead of the music teachers staying in the building doing whatever we're doing, we send them off, and they all across the district get together, and that's been really positive time for them.
And right now, it's rhythm, I mean, aren't they, from what I remember Bob telling me the last time, is that they are at the point where they're looking at elementary into middle school into high school, and that,
so, yeah.
that overall development, and all those music teachers are having those conversations now, so pretty exciting. When you've been in education as long as we have, this is an exciting time. We're paying attention to the things we always assumed were there. It's just kind of nice to have that awakening.
Well, we better thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. We don't want to keep you all night. This was really
Thank you.
perfect for us, so we
Good.
appreciate it very much.
All right. And I thought it was,